this large wealth of money, billions of pesos, at the whim in the hands of the Duterte regime. There is a clause in the special powers that have been granted to him that says, undertake such other measures as may be reasonable and necessary to respond to the pandemic. This is really open, very, blanket rights, blanket deeds that under the Duterte administration that really have no accountability. So today, what we're seeing under the Philippines, that he is ruling with a draconian military response to the COVID crisis, when this is really a public health crisis. What we have seen are grave human rights violations. The poor, the urban poor, workers are really left out of the government solutions. Nasaan ang plano is the call that Filipinos are really asking. Where is this plan? You have special powers, money in the billions of pesos, but where is the plan and where is the implementation on the ground in the different barangays and communities who are impacted the most? So far, we've already seen extrajudicial killings are continuing. Shoot to kill orders, curfew violators have been placed in dog cages or have been even tortured to sit in the hot sun for violating curfews. And even one person has been shot to death for bypassing a checkpoint. So with all that today, we're noticing that there is this militarist approach. He's ruling with an iron fist, but the real virus that the Filipino people today have to combat is the mismanagement in the rule of Duterte. So thank you all for joining us so much. If I could actually get the next slide. In a presidential briefing on April 1st in the Philippines, this is a direct quote from President Duterte. I will not hesitate. My orders are to the police and military, also the barangay, that if there's trouble or the situation arises that people fight and your lives are on the line, shoot them dead. Do you understand? Dead. Instead of causing trouble, I'll send you to the grave. This is the type of response that the Filipino people are getting amidst this COVID pandemic. So for today, can we get the next slide, please? We have a list of speakers. We have 2 speakers who have joined us here from the Philippines. So we'll have Dr. Jean Esperos, who is from the Community Medicine Development Foundation, who will be speaking on updates from the front lines of the COVID crisis in the Philippines and what's needed. We'll also have Attorney Edre Olalia from the National Union of People's Lawyers. We'll have Aves, also a National Malaya Secretariat member, Nat Pimpena from Migrante USA, Loida Nicolas Lewis from US Pinoys for Good Governance, Rhonda Ramiro from Bayan USA, and Reverend Sadie Stone from the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. Next slide, please. So a couple of house rules before we get started today. This is a webinar, and we're so thankful. I think the count right now is 237 and growing. So this webinar is recorded. Everybody is placed on mute. You cannot unmute yourself unless one of the hosts of the webinar unmutes you. So right now, if you want to ask questions, you want to make comments, you're in support, you have clarifications, you can send your questions into the chat box. You can also utilize the tool of raising your hand. Okay, and next slide, please. Great, so this brings us to our first speaker, who I am so excited to introduce. Let me read their bio. So, Dr. Jean Nisperos is a graduate of the UP College of Medicine and worked as a community physician for 11 years in Mindanao before returning to Manila in 2004. He is a faculty at the Department of Family and Community Medicine, College of Medicine at the University of the Philippines, Manila. He also serves as the president of the UP Manila chapter of the All UP Academic Employees Union, as well as a board member of the Community Medicine Development Foundation. Thank you so much, Dr. Jean, for joining us. We'd love to hear stories from the front lines about what's happening in the Philippines. Thank you so much. And you can go to the slide before, thanks. Doc Jean, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. Do you want me to start?
Yes, go for it.
All right, okay. Since you've already given the overview about the current data, the number of COVID cases that we have right now, as that was the data as of last night, let me just briefly walk you through how it started here in the country. Oh, by the way, I have to greet everybody good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are in the United States. So let me start by saying that the first COVID case was documented in the country last January 30. And 2 days later, on the 1st of February, we documented the first COVID related death. The Philippines actually has the first case of COVID related death outside of China at that point. But from February 1 up until February 28th, if you look at the data, there was really not much case finding, not much active preparation involved. In fact, a tweet by one of the experts that is currently working with the interagency task force, one of his tweets last February 28th, he was saying that the government has already contained COVID 19, and we should be thankful for the government efforts towards that end. But by March 7, we actually had the first local transmission. Now, this is important because previous to that, we were just looking at cases that were coming in from abroad, people who were who had a travel history, and that was part of the algorithm in checking for patients. I mean, you either have exposure or you have the symptoms or you have both. But with the local transmission, that started um, that started the ball rolling because now we have people who never went abroad, who didn't go to any country or was not really aware of being exposed to a COVID-19 case, exhibiting symptoms and becoming suspected of having COVID-19. And then we had that case that was confirmed that the person was positive without the previous exposure. So the thinking suddenly became there was a sense of urgency as compared to the month before. But then that was much too late already because by March March 9, the 2 days later after the first local transmission was reported, the government already declared a public health emergency situation. And as you said earlier, by March, the lockdown, the community quarantine took effect on March 15th, but it was announced March 13 in the evening. That was a Friday. So between March 13 and the Sunday where it came into effect, people rushed to the provinces. And there was a mass exodus of people from Metro Manila moving away from the city center, going back to the provinces because they were all afraid of being caught in Metro Manila with the quarantine. Now that is very significant because at that time we didn't know who had the disease, but now there was a bigger chance of it being spread across the country, as we could see later on. And then by March, I think March 24, that's when they had the emergency powers given to the president. Now, let me just go straight to the issues that we faced. Much of the narrative of COVID in this country was focused on, and is still focused on the medical issue. Short supply of personal protective equipment, short supply of test kits. In fact, in on March 16, uh, the DOH had to change its protocol because before that, all of the persons under investigation that exhibited symptoms, whether mild or severe, were being tested for COVID-19. After March 16, only those who exhibited severe symptoms were tested. Those who had mild symptoms, those who were not elderly, and those who did not have comorbidities. These are the factors that made you a high risk patient for COVID 19. Those people were just sent home without being tested. Now, that is a big shift in policy because that's when they realized that they hadn't prepared enough test kits or diagnostic kits. And this made the entire campaign against COVID 19 very much on shaky grounds. For one, we weren't testing enough. In fact, if the 2,000, the number of cases we have, you're talking about 2,311 and more or less 4,000 people tested. in a country with a population of 110 million, that's a very, very small fraction. In fact, projections are saying that in 2 weeks we should have 75,000 confirmed cases, but we just weren't testing enough. So that's why there was a campaign amongst activists to call for a mass testing. Now, mass testing didn't mean that every Filipino had to be tested, but the campaign used the term mass testing to highlight the fact that at that at that juncture, the Department of Health were just testing very, very few people. It wasn't because there weren't enough centers, as you can see now, because before there was only one center, the Research Institute of Tropical Medicine, that was processing all the tests, the diagnostic tests. But now, when they announce that they have more test kits, you have 46 institutions, both public and privately owned, that were asking to be accredited so that they can process the kits. That would expedite everything. In fact, the current number they have, I think it's about 6 institutions across the country can process about 40,000 plus tests each. So the main problem was the inability of government, or at least its short-sightedness, in preparing for this for COVID-19. There was a lot of hubris involved. There was a lot of complacency involved. Now, when that started happening, you can see people now doing all sorts of preparation that involved, including do-it-yourself protective gear, um, because personal protective equipment were just running out. Now, another issue was the designation of hospitals that were designated to be COVID-19 hospitals. Now, the idea is sound because you really want to isolate cases, you want to focus your resources. But the question is whether it should have been the big hospitals that government owned. Like, for instance, they designated the Philippine General Hospital to be one of the COVID centers. Now, PGH by itself, even before COVID, already was up to its neck with patients every day. Now, these were patients who were coming from basically the poorer communities, the marginalized sectors in the country, because PGH was one of the hospitals they can actually access as compared to maybe a lot of tertiary hospitals, but which were privately owned. Now, you imagine when you convert a hospital like that into a COVID center, then you designate specific wards for COVID patients. And those wards that should have been filled up by poor people who do not have COVID but need tertiary care, need special care, are now left to with nowhere to go. In PGH, they've actually allocated at least 130 beds, and we're talking about wards 1 to 4. Now, wards 1 and 3 are your medical wards, and wards 2 and 4 are your surgical wards. So you can imagine patients who used to occupy and should occupy those wards that are coming from poor communities now having nowhere to go. And you have reports of people who needed dialysis, for instance, dying because no hospital would accept them. Now, in relation again to the narrative of medical unpreparedness, part of the number of mortalities related to COVID includes 17 doctors who were exposed unnecessarily because they didn't know the patient had COVID, or they just conducted the work without the protective equipment necessary to do their work. So there was a lot of that going on. That's one aspect. Now, if you think about the healthcare system in the Philippines, the, the urban centers, Metro Manila, Metro Cebu, Metro Davao, have most of the technology needed and the better hospitals. If you move outside of these urban centers, then the healthcare system becomes weaker, and the gaps and the problems of the healthcare system become more pronounced. You have less staff, you have less equipped hospitals, you have less less facilities in general. So the problem we have now with the current narrative is it's focused mainly in Metro Manila. It's focused mainly in on the topic of hospitals. When in fact, if you're talking about COVID-19, it's a public health problem. So what are we doing as far as public health is concerned? There's not much by way of preparing communities, for instance. There's not much mobilization going on, except for the fact that now local government units are providing food packs because of the lockdown. Now we go to the lockdown. What the lockdown itself was introduced without any clear objectives as far as COVID-19 is concerned. The lockdown was called community quarantine, but became a, a real lockdown when they called it the enhanced community quarantine, because many of the implementers were basically had no idea who uh, should be allowed to go. I mean, they were arrested. There were reports that they arrested a hospital personnel for going home, riding a bike, a motorcycle with his brother, simply because they had no social distancing. I mean, that's how ridiculous it got here. And you're thinking, what are we going to do with this lockdown? How are we going to know if we're actually containing the disease when in the first place we were testing enough? We don't know how far the disease has gone. We don't know where it has spread. We don't know. We don't know much. So we have no basic data. But we implemented a lockdown, and now there's talk of lifting it after April 15. Now the DOH has not even given any criteria for for any basis of lifting the lockdown. Well, because the DOH can't. It doesn't have any real idea how far COVID-19 has spread across the country, how severe it is. If you're looking at the numbers, for instance, you will see that in the last 3 or 4 days, the spike in the number of confirmed cases has really gone up. Now, the trend is correct, but the DOH really has no idea how severe it is, the gravity of the situation. You cannot just base it on the numbers we have, because, as I said, they've only tested about 4,000 people out of 110 million Filipinos. The numbers are just not representative of the real situation. Now, that's
I
the medical aspect. Yeah, yeah.
don't want to interrupt you, but you have 1 minute left to wrap up,
All
and
right,
we'll have
okay.
a Q&A
All
session
right.
after.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay. So the last part that I want to talk about is precisely what happened yesterday when the urban poor had to go out and demand for food. The lockdown is actually being implemented without much support for those who are already vulnerable, the poor communities, the informal settlers. So that's a big problem. And the solution that has always been on the table is a very heavy-handed iron rule. Now, I want the attorney Edri Olalia to discuss that. But let me just say that many of the official documents that have given the president more powers are based on COVID-19. But none of the structures or none of the programs that are set there are actually addressing COVID-19. You're talking about the National Action Plan against COVID-19, but the implementing agencies are the Department of National Defense and the Department of Interior and Local Government. The five people who formed the task force implementing that are all composed of generals. The Department of Health wasn't even involved there. Now, that is very reflective of how this government has approached the problem of COVID-19. Let me end by saying that from the start, since January, every time the president of the Philippines would speak, Duterte would give a press conference, would make a speech. I mean, there was a time he actually just read when he was implementing the enhanced community quarantine. He was actually reading from a piece of paper. But from the start, you can actually tell that the man did not even bother to know the true extent of the problem. He did not even bother to ask what what COVID-19 is all about, to know the disease. I mean, you can actually tell that either the Department of Health has been remiss in giving him ideas or vetting him, or he simply does not listen to the Department of Health. But what you can actually see is the fact that he didn't care, and he still doesn't care. So that kind of explains where we are right now, why many of our efforts to address COVID-19 is failing. And I want to end by saying that it's worrisome because we are just starting to see the full effects of the disease. And as I know you're experiencing the States, people are dying. We will be experiencing that pretty soon. And I don't know if the healthcare system and society at large can actually absorb that kind of situation. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Doc Jean Speros, for offering what it's like on the front lines in the Philippines, especially for our healthcare workers. Duterte has said in the following days in his press briefings that health workers should be lucky to die for their
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
even
he,
though
he's
it's opposable.
it actually hurts more because he said it in Filipino. He said that maswerte silang namatay sila para sa bayan. I mean, it was so cavalier the way he said it. And I feel for the families of these health workers because I think everyone would have preferred for them to live. And they died not because of the disease, but because of the failure of government to protect them. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that.
All right.
So for our next speaker, we're going to move along. And can we get the next slide? Yes, and these are some of our hashtags. So if anybody would like to share on social media while this forum is happening, hashtag Duterte resign, hashtag Duterte virus. Please share your thoughts. So our speaker that's up next is attorney Edre Olalia from the National Union of People's Lawyers. I'm going to read their bio. So Attorney Edre Olalia is a special legal consultant on UN or the United Nations mechanisms to Philippine rights groups on the United Nations Human Rights Council, Universal Periodic Review, and the UN HRC Resolution 41-2 led by Iceland. Co-headed by the Equivoice delegation to the 43rd session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in March 2020. They're also a convener and presently serving their second term as the president of the National Unions of People's Lawyers, the largest organization of pro bono human rights lawyers in the Philippines. They're also the transitional president of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers and a convener and leader for many different organizations, such as the Councils for the Defense of Liberties, Movement Against Tyranny, Manlaban, a group of human rights lawyers against extrajudicial killings, and Concerned Lawyers for Civil Liberties, a broad coalition of human rights legal luminaries. Edre is also the subject of various threats, including vicious red tagging by the military, public vilification, and false charges. So we're deeply honored to have you today, Attorney Edre. They'll be speaking on the state of democracy and human rights in the Philippines. We can hear you're very low. Can you speak louder? We'll do a test. It's still very quiet. The speaker, it's still very low. Okay, now we are on mute. It's very quiet, attorney. I wonder if it's your headset.
Hear me better? Is better?
Better.
Okay. I have 10 minutes. I'll try to keep to my time, but I try to organize it into 5 parts. First of all, what is the situation before these emergency measures were implemented? Second, I have some notes so that I will not be rambling. What are the coercive measures on the occasion? I'm using the term on the occasion, not by reason or because of the pandemic. Third is that what are the indicators, some of the indicators anyway, of the militaries or fascists or enforcement-oriented or control fetish approach of the government towards this pandemic. The fourth would be I'd like to touch on some of the responses against these coercive measures. And finally, I'd like to outline some of the arenas of struggle or the people's response towards these measures. Can you hear me? I'm good? I'm good?
You're
All right.
good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, even before this pandemic or the emergency measures, we all know that the civil and political situation, as far as human rights are concerned, is already very bad. We know of the extrajudicial killings, the Trump up charges, the 600 or so political prisoners, the scripted raids where there's a routinary planting of guns and explosives, and the simultaneous orchestrated attempts to enlarge or even revise draconian measures like the Human Security Act, the revival of the anti-subversion law, and of course, the vicious red tagging. That is the situation before us. But comes the pandemic. What was the response, or what were the responses of the Philippine government insofar as addressing purportedly this pandemic? I would like to point out at least three major ones. First of all, there is this law called the Mandatory Reporting of Notifiable Diseases and Health Events of Public Health Concern Act. They have been invoking this existing law to arrest people, but nowhere in that law does a violation of any of the measures would be penalized, because that law only requires people who are infected or who knew somebody was infected to notify and cooperate. But it doesn't contain anything that would justify any arrest. And they have said, even before the Emergency Act was passed, that they could arrest everybody, anybody, even without a warrant. That's the first repressive measure that I'd like to share. Second will be this panicky or even exaggerated curfew and checkpoints rather than check up. They place all kinds of checkpoints that would restrict mobility, travel, even the more essential ones, even the health personnel. And Ginny mentioned about this incident about these health workers. And the third will be, of course, the Emergency Powers Act, or what we call here the BAHO, no? BAHO, or the Bayanihan Heal as One Act, no? We call it BAHO more than BOHA, because it really smells, no? It stinks. Why? First of all, it is absolutely unnecessary. Why? Because there are enough laws. There are enough laws to implement remedial measures. You don't need a shotgun emergency measure, just this BAHO. Second of all, it concentrates power in one person. In one person, without no real, genuine check and balance. Because Congress follows his wish, and his wish is their command. And he controls the Supreme Court, because almost all of the sitting justices are appointees of the Duterte government. Fourth, it gives unbridled, unlimited discretion and prerogative to transfer funds from one place to the other. And fifth, it contains draconian measures, many of them, but I'd like to point out the most dangerous one, which is about fake news. That's under a certain provision, section 6F, if you're interested, which states that somebody who propagates false information with no valid or beneficial effect, geared towards chaos, panic, anarchy, fear, or confusion, are liable under this Emergency Powers Act. Well, I'd like to think that even the spokesperson, the president, the PCOO, secretary, even the DILG can be liable with this very expansive and undefined legally action, which actually is intended to stifle free expression and dissent. My third point: what are the indicators of what I call a control, obsession, or enforcement-oriented approach? Well, we all know about what happened in San Roque yesterday. You all know that. They arrested more than 20 urban poor people who were just asking for relief goods, which have not been coming even after 3 weeks. And I'd like to point out also that there are more arrests, 17,000, than there are tests of the COVID-19 virus. More than 3,000, only more than 3,000 have been tested compared to more than 17,000 people arrested. So you can see the sense of priorities or mispriorities of this government. Second indicator, this has already been touched upon by Julie and by Jeannie. The fascist, the threatening, the shoot to kill. I said in my Facebook post that when your government starts to threaten to shoot you because you're hungry, then we're in a lot of trouble. We're in a lot of trouble. When your own government threatens to shoot you because you're hungry, we are in a lot of trouble. Third, this has already been mentioned. The junta, a de facto junta, is the one calling the shots of the NAP. Well, it's a nice acronym, NAP, no, because he has been sleeping all along, no. This group of military and ex-military men are calling the shots, no, and this reflects the kind of approach that this government is employing. And then, of course, another indicator is this very dangerous statement by a undersecretary of the Interior saying that in times of emergency, and it was said publicly, in times of emergency, there are no rights. In times of emergency, there is no habeas corpus. Sumunod na lang, mga pasaway. Yan yung ginagamit na palagi na term, pasaway. Sumunod na lang. Blind obedience is what they're calling. Fifth, and all this fascist draconian mentality has rubbed off. Our barangay captain, to our village guards, to the MMDA, to the CHPG, to the police, to the military, to the councilors, and you can see that people are being jailed in dog cages. People are being exposed in the heat of the sun. People are made to watch a corpse during a wake indefinitely. People are from the barangay are roaming the streets with coffins and with this, what do you call this, in kamatayan. We should realize that it's not only the physical health that's important, it's also the mental health. If you see these icons, the coffins roaming with the ano ba yung kamatayan sa English, yung merong kawit, no? It affects the mental health of people at a very important time. And of course, you've also seen about this governor from Cebu publicly humiliating somebody who posted, well, of course, we can debate about whether it's right or wrong, but you cannot humiliate somebody and ask him to make a promise. And we also saw a affidavit going rounds saying that I am guilty of violating curfew and now I am waiving all my rights and I'm going to stay in my home and I'm waiving all my rights to any health care. It is rubbing off. It is rubbing off from the top to the lowest of the officials. And of course, before we forget, the red tagging has not stopped. It has not stopped. General Parlade, perhaps he has nothing better to do, even criticize the NUPL question and answer, which is just an informative bulletin on what to do, what not to do, what are rights. And then he used the opportunity to say that, why don't you put all the violations of the NPA here, as if that is any remotely relevant to any of the rights that we put out. And maybe you also missed that this post by the Philippine National Police saying that you should not protest at home. They were putting it out in social media. And finally, and this is really ridiculous, there's also some messages going around that the red armband or the red ribbon, if you heard about it, as a sign of solidarity to our frontliners? Do you know that the PNP is saying that that is the handiwork of the communists? That is the handiwork of the communist terrorist group? Well, I saw Secretary Nograles wearing a red armband, but perhaps he is the greatest pretender because he's probably a communist terrorist pretending to be a government official. So these are ridiculous responses, no? And given all this, what can we do? Well, of course, we should speak out. We should fight and criticize the VIP testing. We should call out the double standards between somebody like Coco Pimentel. I wish him well, and his baby and his wife, but he did something wrong. Vis-a-vis somebody like Mayor Vico Soto, who is being harassed and being penalized for something that he did even before the law was passed. And of course, we saw the San Roque, how they treated the urban poor. And of course, we could always continue with our campaigns, and let us not forget the hundreds, even thousands of detention prisoners, especially the sick and the elderly. The United Nations has called a campaign for the release. Some countries have already released thousands. And we should never ever forget that rights, civil and political, and most especially social, economic, and cultural rights, the right to health, the right to life, the right to access to public information, are even more significant in times of emergency. And finally, just give me 3 minutes. What are the arenas of struggle? Well, the courts. We can question these emergency powers. We can defend the urban poor of San Roque. We can work for the release of the prisoners. Although the courts are physically closed, there are ways by which we can do this. Second, in the United Nations Human Rights Council, where we just came last March, we are pushing for the resolution, hopefully to be passed in June, about the extrajudicial killings and other violations of human rights, including these repressive measures being implemented on the occasion of the pandemic. And of course, you all know about the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Let's not forget this because it's still on deck. The Office of Prosecutor has promised that something is going to come out before the end of the year. And finally, it's always the people. It's always the people, the mass movement that is decisive. It is not the government. It is not any repressive measure. It is always the people who are vigilant about their rights, despite or in spite of all this emergency. So what am I saying? It is a fascist approach. It does not provide, the government does not provide neither immediate nor long-term pro-people democratic solutions. And I'd like to venture and hazard an opinion. I think we are far worse than before the COVID-19 emergency measures. Why? Because this is a dress rehearsal for martial law. There is no martial law on paper, but it's already repressive and draconian. The rights of people, the basic rights of people, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, are already being restricted disproportionately, unreasonably, arbitrarily, and without any immediate solution for any redress. But notwithstanding all this, we still hope for a changing and better world against this virulent fascism, not only in the Philippines, but all over the world, including in the United States, in Brazil, in Hungary, and many other countries that mistakenly use repressive measures to address a basically public health emergency issue. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Attorney Edre. I think Attorney put it very clearly. When your government threatens to shoot you because you're hungry, then we have a problem. When we have more people incarcerated than tested for COVID-19, we have a problem in the Philippines. A lot of these the shoot to kill orders, the current situation in the Philippines has boosted the Twitter hashtag Oust Duterte Now. It is one of the top trending hashtags currently on Twitter. So thank you so much for those calls to action. If people have questions, please send them in the chat. We'll have a portion after all of the speakers to answer questions. We can also open up the floor to people who want to share in this forum today. So for people who joined us late, it's Kalusugan, hindi Diktadura, Health, Not Dictatorship. It's an online forum for overseas Filipinos on Duterte's handling of the COVID crisis. So next speaker that we have today, we have up next Aves Nibungko from Malaya Movement. He is a national secretariat member of Malaya Movement, which again is a broad movement of individuals, organizations, and various formations united under the common objectives of defending human rights, democracy, and sovereignty in the Philippines. So welcome Aves, who will be sharing on what Malaya's perspective and what we as overseas Filipinos here in the United States can do to contribute to curtailing what is happening under the Duterte regime.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Again, thank you all for plugging in. It's a very important time for us to get together. Despite the conditions, despite the the conditions that are preventing us to be together physically, right? But it's allowing us to connect, right, in various creative ways. So again, we from the Malaya Movement, we are a broad movement based here in the United States and now have expanded in other countries, right? Comprised of individuals and organizations who want to take a stand, right, for human rights and democracy and sovereignty in the Philippines. Our points of unity are we are opposed to the killings that are happening in the Philippines. We are opposed to the establishment of a fascist dictatorship. We oppose all de facto martial law policies, including the ones that are in place now with the Bayanihan We Heal as One Act. We condemn and are against the ongoing corruption and the practices of political dynasty in the Philippines, which is very evident even in the conduct of testing and provision of relief. And lastly, we stand for genuine democracy. We do not believe that all the powers of the government should be centralized under one person. And lastly, we stand for Philippine sovereignty against all foreign powers, which with what Duterte did in response to the coronavirus, right? He put the interests of foreign powers first before the interests and the welfare of the Filipino people. So on behalf of the Malaya Movement, we believe that Duterte's handling of the COVID-19 crisis is a disaster. Time and again, Duterte has puts his puppetry to foreign powers above the welfare and the interests of the Filipino people. He deliberately chose to appease the interests of foreign powers, particularly China, as he ignored the clamors for an immediate travel ban, which contributed to the increased risk and spread of coronavirus to the general population. He capitalized on the genuine fear and panic of the population and have resorted to militaristic approach. And the previous speakers before me have already elaborated on the disastrous impacts of this militaristic approach, right? And despite all of this, right, we condemn and denounce Duterte's continuing reign of terror as people are struggling and coming together to put efforts to address the pandemic. His government and his armed minions in the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police continues to commit human rights violations with the arrest of human rights activists such as Teresita Naul from Lanao del Norte last 15, and the assassination of peasant activist Marlon Maldos, 25 years old from Bohol, this past March 17. These violent attacks on youth and the elderly, human rights defenders reveal that his sustained bloodlust of this regime, right, despite and amidst this global pandemic. We believe that is this simply a matter of incompetence on behalf of Duterte, right? This disastrous handling. We believe from the Malaya Movement that this is not simply incompetence, right? This seems to be a perfectly calculated move on the part of Duterte to take advantage of the pandemic, right, to further consolidate his power and expand his power without declaring martial law, and to continue his corruption, right? There are a lot of moves to bring and centralize the collection of donations and relief to the government. And there are reports that these are being repackaged and being promoted as donations from his favorite Senator Bongo, right? But what can we do, right? We know that we're thousands of miles away. Our response is that we must continue to extend our solidarity to our kababayans. We ask that we continue to organize our own relief efforts. We cannot rely and trust on the government, especially under Duterte, to do this for us and for our people. There are a lot of relief organizations who are doing amazing work on the ground, people's organizations who are organizing themselves to help our kababayans. We must also continue to protest. There are a lot of conversations out there that during this crisis, we should be quiet and we should just obey and follow and support the government. But we believe that it is actually not just our right, but our duty to criticize the Duterte regime and expose his atrocities against the Filipino people, especially because there is a crisis that his regime, if not created, have aggravated. That is causing more deaths in our community. And lastly, if Duterte still has an ounce of concern for the welfare of the Filipino people, we believe that he should step down now from power. Right, the longer that he stays in power, his regime just continues to cause more atrocities and hardship for the Filipino people. So we from the Malaya Movement support the Filipino people's call for Duterte to step down from power. But lastly, if we are to realize and to push our advocacies and to see a genuinely democratic and free Philippines, we must get organized. We encourage everyone here, if you're not yet part of an organization, we must be organized. The Duterte regime is an organized dictatorship. He has his troll army, he has the military, he has control over the legislative body and the people in the courts. So we as the people must also be organized, in our neighborhoods, in our churches, in our workplaces, in our schools. Get connected, talk to your friends, talk to your family, and tell them that it is we must speak up and take action against the atrocities of the Duterte regime. So lastly, we urge everyone to join the Malaya Movement. The longer that Duterte stays in power, the more damage and atrocities he causes to the Filipino people. So thank you again, and there will be more calls to action later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aves. Malaya Movement, we're launching a petition today. So in the calls to action, we will share this petition that we would love for everybody to sign. So up next, our next speaker will be Nap Pempeña from Migrante USA. Nap started organizing as a student leader in the Philippines and joined Anak Bayan upon migration to the US. Seeing the need for migrant worker organizing, he transitioned into Migrante and was elected Secretary General when Migrante USA was founded in 2018. Migrante USA is an alliance of Filipino workers and migrant organizations dedicated to fighting for the rights and welfare of Filipinos in the US and for the genuine democracy and freedom in the Philippines. As we know, we're in the midst of a global pandemic with COVID-19 and with such a wide diaspora of overseas Filipino workers in almost every single region within the world. Our workers are really some of the most neglected, some of the most oppressed. So here today, Nap will share on the impacts of COVID on Filipino workers. Thank you, Nap.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks again for inviting Migrante to share the perspective and experiences of Filipino migrant workers amidst this crisis. The handling of the government has been described as disastrous, right, by earlier speakers. And this disastrous handling, as you can imagine, has sent waves of repercussions, negative repercussions to the diaspora of Filipinos overseas, the majority of whom remain a part of the working class now. And so, yeah, in the next several minutes, I'll share some of the specific struggles that Filipino workers are going through in this moment. Amidst this pandemic, overseas Filipino workers suffer from the criminal neglect and corruption of the regime. And here in the US, seafarers, J1 hotel workers, and other workers are witness to this government's inadequate response. No? Next slide, please. Are slides available? Next. Yeah. So, in case you didn't know, about a third of the world's seafaring crew are Filipino. According to news reports, there are about 40,000 cruise ship workers who need to be repatriated today due to virus hit ships. And that's just the cruise ships. No, there's more crew members in oil tankers and cargo ships, etc. And one of those ships is the Grand Princess cruise ship, currently anchored in the Bay Area. Of the 1,000 plus crew members of it, about 538 are Filipinos, and 445 of them were repatriated back to the Philippines, quarantined for 2 weeks, and were released back to their families, with only several of the 445 being randomly tested, despite being exposed continuously for an extended period while on the ship. About 91% or 91 of them remain on the ship right now. The workers, those in the Philippines, pleaded to the government and to the Magsaysay Corporation, their recruitment agency, for mass testing and compensation, but they did not get any response. And you can see this article posted here and some of the pictures of the crew members from the ship. And as of now, the government's promise of cash aid through the Overseas Welfare Agency has not reached them. As I mentioned, 91 or so of the Grand Princess crew members are still on board in the San Francisco Bay Area, whose conditions we don't know yet. We have reached out to the consulate for cooperation to reach the workers, and the only response we got so far is them saying that they are doing their best. And this ship, the Grand Princess, is just one of tens of ships right now. No? And there are thousands more seafarers who need proper medical attention and economic safety nets for the loss of livelihood in the next several months. You've probably heard of the other ship, Zandam, that's afloat right now off the coast of Florida, Fort Lauderdale. And there's another ship in the Caribbean. And so it's really tough for our seafarer kababayan because a lot of nations, a lot of states are not even opening their ports to the stranded ships. And in addition to seafarers, temporary visa workers in the US are being laid off en masse. Hundreds of Filipino J1 hotel workers right now are being terminated easily by their host companies and employers due to the hotel closures. Recruited for supposedly cultural exchange program or OJTs, on the job trainings, each of these youth paid somewhere between $3,000 to $8,000 only to end up here in the US being a replacement for the domestic workforce without actually receiving any training or any significant cultural exchange. So it's a very fraudulent scheme that's been going on for several years, if not decades now. And there's no or little oversight of this program by the Philippine government. So far, the Philippine government's only response is to send them home. But for these youth, it's difficult to simply go home because for them, it means that they would be driven deeper in debt. No? And so the government's simplistic solution only compounds the long-standing problem of labor trafficking through the J1 cultural exchange visa. No? So, and then there's the recently declared government subsidy of $200 for overseas workers, which is very measly and actually excludes a vast number of Filipino workers, like those who are undocumented, who have overstayed. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the a post by a J1 worker. Right now you can see posts of J1 hotel interns, workers posting about being laid off and all over social media. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of just earlier today or yesterday, some shots from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where Filipino overseas workers were vehemently harassed and dispersed by Philippine officials when they were merely seeking aid, specifically the $200 monthly subsidy for overseas Filipinos. And so that's why, we can see that, this very inhumane handling of the Duterte regime makes worse the already inhumane labor export policy. And this is just the overseas workers in the Philippines. BPO or call center workers continue to work. Workers in export processing zones continue to work. And you can really see the orientation of the policies of the government, namely, oriented towards serving foreign business in the midst of the crisis. And so for Migrante, we need transparency, cooperation, and a comprehensive and inclusive plan to assist overseas Filipinos, especially Filipino workers. And we must hold all agencies of the Duterte government accountable, the POEA, OWA, the DFA, all the consulates and the embassies. Otherwise, if Duterte continues to willingly ignore the plight of the people, the death of Filipino overseas workers and their families will be on his hands. And so, kaya kami sa Migrante USA, kami ay nakikiisa sa buong sambayanan sa panawagan na solusyong medikal, hindi militar, tulong, hindi kulong, aid, not arrests, and oust Duterte now. Maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Nap from Migrante USA, for sharing the very important information about the impacts of the Duterte administration's management of COVID-19 and our often neglected OFWs, Filipino workers who keep the economy afloat in the Philippines. So for next, the next speaker we'd like to invite is Loida Lewis of US Pinoys for Good Governance. Loida Lewis is a Filipino-American community leader, businesswoman, philanthropist, and former general attorney in the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. She's the national chair of U.S. Pinoys for Good Governance, an organization advocating for good governance, transparency, integrity, and sovereignty in the Philippines. So thank you so much. Welcome, Ma'am Loida Lewis. Are you there, Loida? See if we
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for inviting me, Malaya and Julie. And after hearing the on-the-spot testimony of Dr. Yin and Attorney Ebre, nakakaiyak. Masakit ang puso ko dahil sa ang kalaban natin, ang kalaban sa Pilipinas, ay itong coronavirus, itong COVID-19. Yan ang kalaban. It is an invisible enemy. Pero ang enemy ni President Duterte are the people, the poor people. Anong klaseng pag-iisip yan? Bakit siya magsasabing ang hindi sumunod, patayin? Napaka walang puso niyan. Ang dapat niyang gawin ay, this is a health issue, a health problem. All of the countries in the world, the presidents, the prime minister, are all looking at a medical solution because this enemy has never been, this invisible enemy has never been around. Nagkaroon tayo ng Spanish flu, and millions died. But this one is something, so merong Ebola, merong SARS, merong MERS, but this one is something so different. And sa Pilipinas, sino ang walang laban? Ang mga pobre. The 8% of our people are on the D&E. Ibig sabihin, talagang walang pera. And so, pag sinabing, yung mga salaries every day, wala silang kikitain. Sila papatayin. So, I'm calling on President Duterte. Ang puso mo. I'm calling on those that I know in Secretary Fin Lorenzana of Defense, Secretary Sunny Dominguez of Finance, and spokesperson Sal, Attorney Panelo. Kausapin yung presidente, ang hindi yan ng kalaban. Ang kalaban ay itong coronavirus. So, unang-una, yes, stay home, but everybody should wear a mask because hindi mo alam na nasa iyo na ang coronavirus because the symptoms happen 4 or 5 days. So kung wala kang face mask, affecting all the people around you. So it will go on. That's number 1. Number 2, test. Paano natin malalaman kung gaano kabigat itong ating kalaban? Kung walang test, bakit ang test ay baril? Maling-mali. Parang walang utak. At saka number 3, sa Sorsogon, thanks to our cuisine, gata, coconut oil, according to Governor Chis Escudero, wala kaming coronavirus doon dahil sa ang virgin coconut oil, the tree of life, is saving us. It is contra-virus. So those are some of the things that the president issue. It is a matter of finding out how do you find this enemy. Ang enemy ay hindi ang Filipino people. So sinasabi nyo, Duterte step down, we in the United States, wala kaming magagawa dyan. Pero kayo na nasa Pilipinas, isip-isipin nyo kung anong dapat nyong gawin. But most of all, please, President Duterte, have pity. Kaawaan naman ninyo ang mga kasambayan natin, ang mga kababayan natin, lalo na yung mga pobre. So, on my part, sa mga Filipino in the Americas, I'm asking you to donate to Caritas Manila, to samahan ang magkakaisang pamilyang pagtawid, to likhaan, send whatever you can through the internet by clicking givetoasia.org. Give, G-I-V-E. Number 2, to Asia, A-S-I-A, givetoasia.org, O-R-G/PBSP, Philippine Business Social Progress. Uulitin ko kung pwede meron kayong $10, $20, padala na nyo, please. Magbibigay sila, karamihan yung mga taong bayan, yung mga pobre sa Metro Manila. Dahil sa ito ay mga arawan, kumisan walang bahay, at sila ang kawawang-kawawa. Magbibigay sila ng pagkain, mana packs, at COVID kits, medical and health supplies. GIVE number 2, givetoasia.org/PBSP, Philippine Business Social Progress. So, kung meron kayo, please write it down. And kung hindi nyo nakuha, tanungin na lang nyo si Julie. At I'm calling again on President Duterte. I know you will not step down, but please, hanapin mo uli ang puso mo at parang nawala. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Tita Loida. Thank you for sharing. And I think after hearing all of these horrendous stories from the front lines in the Philippines, the grave human rights violations amidst the COVID crisis, which is a public health crisis, which doesn't warrant military response, this town hall today, this online forum, is a way that we are showing our unity and creating solutions of how we can act as Filipinos overseas in support of our kababayan back home. So we have 2 speakers left, and then after our 2 speakers, we will be opening up the floor for any questions. So please put any of your questions in the chat box. We'll answer them in the order that they came in. So our next speaker will be, we're going to invite Reverend Sadie Stone from the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. Reverend Sadie Stone is the pastor of Bethany United Methodist Church, San Francisco, California. Currently serves as the co-chair of the California Nevada Philippine Solidarity Task Force, Deputy Secretary of the Global Council of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, and co-chair of the San Francisco Surge Direct Action Committee. She is the mom to 10-year-old twins. And currently ITRIP-US has over 40 member organizations and honorary individual members, and do the important work of educating about the grave human rights situation in the Philippines. So thank you so much, Sadie, Rev Sadie, for joining us today. Are you there, Reverend Sadie? Reverend Sadie, are you there?
I was waiting for you to unmute me. Thank you. So thanks for having me this evening on this forum. So I am just here to talk some about the work that ITRIP has been doing over the past few years, especially as it relates to the U.S. support of the militarization in the Philippines. So in response to COVID, what we've heard from some of the other speakers is that Duterte has responded only with militarism. It hasn't been concerned. It hasn't been concerned for the medical folks. It hasn't been concerned for the people of the Philippines. Instead, he's restricting movement of people. He's putting so-called quarantine violators in dog cages, and today commanding the military to shoot to kill quarantine violators, using this as an opportunity to turn the Philippines into a de facto martial law, which has been the way that he's operated since he's been elected. His militaristic response is in line with his previous policies. So although it's disheartening, it's who he's shown himself to be. He's another US-backed war criminal in line with Marcos and some of the others who have been in power in the Philippines. So while there have been some senators and representatives who have criticized Duterte's human rights violation, especially as it relates to Lila de Lima, right now the real test of the genuine U.S. criticism is how we're going to respond with our U.S. aid going to Duterte. Because right now the U.S. aid that is going over to the Philippines is going to aid in the military operations. It's going to further traumatize and further victimized folks who are already in need of more resources, who are in need of more medical care, not in need of more militarization. So since 2016, the US has provided $550 million in military aid to Duterte. And even with Duterte's administration saying that they're going to terminate the VFA, our State Department has said it wants to continue to maintain an arms deal with the Philippines. And it hopes to renegotiate the VFA into a longer, more substantial military agreement. So it doesn't seem like the U.S. is willing to back down despite the human rights violations that have been ongoing for the past few years. President Trump and Duterte continue to have a positive regard for each other. And we've seen this in the way that they're even responding to the COVID crisis. There's a lot of similarities in their responses. Duterte's response in failing to provide the medical equipment and economic release is so similar to what we're seeing here in the United States, and they're friends with each other. They're cut from the same cloth. So U.S. aid to a dictator should have stopped a long time ago. We shouldn't be in the situation now where it's ramping up even more in the midst of a global pandemic, but we're once again seeing that this is who Duterte is. But if there was ever a time for the United States to show that it believes in human rights, it's now, when Duterte is openly commanding the killing of innocent people who are looking for help, who are looking for safety, who are looking for food and resources, and he's being told to shoot them. So our call continues that we need to cut the aid to the Philippines and end support of Duterte's. And right now we're in the midst of a global pandemic. And because this is a global pandemic, our call continues to be for global solidarity. That in order for this world to respond to the COVID-19 in a way that makes sense, it requires all of us to be concerned about all the people all over the globe. And that includes the people in the Philippines and the people all over the place. And so that is why our call and our hope is to continue to put pressure so that the U.S. military dollars that are being used to further victimize human rights can instead be shifted to help aid in supporting basic human rights for food and medical care and basic access to things that people need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sadie, from the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. It really is a stark reminder of how much US tax dollars go to human rights violations of Filipinos abroad. Last year alone, 193.5 million tax dollars went to the Duterte regime to military assistance. It is this funding that is supporting human rights violations and the work of International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines is exposing this grave issue and also advocating, doing legislative campaigns around cutting this aid. And so that hopefully it will be redirected in ways that support the Philippines in this time of a global pandemic. So thank you so much, Reverend Sadie. We're actually gonna go back in one slide. We have one speaker left before we open it up the floor to Q&A and also additional comments. So our next speaker is Rhonda Ramiro from Bayan USA. Rhonda has been an active in the movement for national democracy in the Philippines since the 1990s. Rhonda was a founder of Bayan USA in 2005, establishing the first overseas chapter of the Philippines-based Bagong Alansang Makabayan, or New Patriotic Alliance, or Bayan for short, a nationwide multi-sectoral alliance of over 1,000 grassroots people's organizations in the Philippines fighting for national and social liberation. Rhonda is currently the chair of Bayan USA after serving as Secretary General from 2009 to 2012 and Vice Chair from 2013 to 2018. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for joining us.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks everybody for joining this really important webinar, and more importantly, for really committing to taking action, because I'm sure if you all were motivated like I am by all the speakers that we've heard so far, you all want to take action after this webinar. So thank you for being here. The other thing by now on this webinar is that it has become crystal clear that the Duterte regime has responded both in a negligent way and from a completely incorrect framework. So for Duterte, it's obvious. COVID-19 has been an issue of peace and order rather than a health crisis. For Bayan USA, we really expected nothing different from Duterte because throughout his presidency, he's treated every issue this way, as an issue of peace and order, or really more blatantly, as an issue of control and repression. We can all remember that he started his term with the issue of drug abuse, or his so-called war on drugs, which really resulted in the killing of over 30,000 people. He continued on to the so-called ISIS terrorist threat, which resulted in the devastation of the city of Marawi and martial law declared Mindanao for 2 years. And then he has relentlessly pursued this counter-terrorist and counterinsurgency framework to go after activists, organizers, the media, political opponents, anybody who voices criticism of his policies. And so while Duterte continues to rampage against the people instead of taking on the COVID-19 virus, we demand nationwide systemic action by the government to care for the immediate needs of the people in order to treat the ill and prevent more people from becoming sick and dying. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the demands that Bayan and Bayan USA as an overseas chapter of Bayan are making, which we believe will actually attend to both the immediate health and medical needs of the masses in this urgent time, as well as the equally important social and economic needs of the people. So, first, medically, there needs to be an allocation of sufficient funds for free testing, treatment, and eradication of COVID-19, and to fix, the delivery of health services. And it's a lie if the government tries to say there are no funds for this. There can easily be funds for this if we use funds that are earmarked for emergencies, as well as redirect funds from things that we don't need, like more military, like more counterinsurgency. Second, there needs to be the implementation of mass testing that is free, widespread, and systematic. Not something that's only limited to the elite or a few of the cronies of Duterte, like other speakers have talked about. Third, there needs to be an increase in the equipment, supply, and personnel for hospitals. This can be done. It's not as if the country actually doesn't have the talent or the people power to do it. The problem is that the government for decades has prioritized exporting its health workers instead of ensuring that they have adequate salaries and the ability to stay in the country. The country can develop the equipment, can develop the supplies, and can ensure that the hospitals are staffed. There needs to be the establishment of sanitation facilities and quarantine centers in communities. There needs to be, hand washing facilities, sanitation tents, disinfection facilities. It's not realistic or practical to just leave it up to the people who are living in cramped quarters, who are poor, who don't have access to these things on the daily basis to be able to do it. It needs to be undertaken by the government in an organized, systematic, and centralized way. And we need to ensure the support and protection of frontliners. And that's the health workers, the doctors, the nurses, medical technicians, x-ray technicians, et cetera. We aren't asking them to sacrifice their lives unnecessarily. We should be giving them the protective equipment that they need. And there needs to be a system-wide response to COVID-19 from the top to the bottom. So system-wide, government level, as well as ensuring that people on the ground in the communities at the very smallest barangays, in the far-flung areas, in the urban areas, are able to understand the information that's being given about how to protect themselves and how to access the services that they need. And then equally important, like I said, are the social economic measures that need to be taken. So we need to be banning layoffs and give support to affected workers and semi-workers who are being laid off at this time. They need to implement mandatory paid leave. There needs to be support given to small businesses who can't give paid leave to their employees. There needs to be emergency relief packs and other kinds of support given to the poor. We've been seeing images on Facebook of the tiny relief packs which are being given out, which are barely enough for one person for one day, but it's supposed to serve a family of 5 for 2 days. These kinds of things are inexcusable. There should be a moratorium on bills and penalties. Rent should be put on hold, and people should be allowed to continue to live without worrying about being evicted right now. There should be controls on prices and ensure the supply of basic goods and services to people, and in particular around water and electricity, communications, and medicine. There needs to be a reliable transportation system for those who need it, people who need to come into the city for testing. If the widespread testing isn't available yet, they need to be able to access that. And there needs to be a stop to the demolition of houses for the poor, and we need to shelter the unhoused. Can't emphasize enough how people need to be able to be in a home if they're being asked to stay at home. So, at all levels, the Filipino people are trying to do their part to resolve the crisis. But really, in conclusion, I want to make it clear that for Bayan USA, we view these measures that we're demanding as emergency remedies that need to be undertaken, largely because the overall economic, political, and social development of the Philippines has been stunted for over 400 years since Spanish and American colonial times. If the Philippines could actually achieve genuine independence from the US, instead of being in the position of a neo-colony to the US, if the Philippines could achieve genuine democracy instead of being under the rule of a few elite landlord and big corporate families, the Filipino people could chart a course for real land reform. It could have its own large-scale national industries. It could have an independent foreign policy, and it could have a self-sufficient economy that doesn't rely on exporting products or people to keep its economy afloat. And in a crisis such as this one, it really becomes clear that if the Philippines were truly independent and had a genuine democracy, we could develop a mass-oriented and scientific culture that prioritizes the development of a public health system that provides quality, needed, accessible health services for all, and not just the tiny few who can afford it. There's a program for this. And, as a representative of Bayan USA and Bayan Philippines, we have a program that we strive for true national democracy and what we think will lead to this kind of independence of the country. And for health, we see it as upholding free, quality health services in an overall system, that serves all, and that we end the policies that privatize public hospitals and services. There should be priority given to preventative medicine, nutrition, family planning, ensure that doctors and health workers, are especially available in rural areas. And so, these are things that we've been fighting for a long time, but have become even more critical now. As many of the other speakers have said, that in the time of COVID, we don't stop fighting. We think these things are possible even now in the midst of a crisis. And we believe that people are seeing it now, that Duterte, if allowed to continue, will just continue running the Philippines into the ground. And so while these medical and socioeconomic remedies are immediate, that we need these in order to save the Filipino people from COVID, in order to save the Filipino people for the long haul, we need to take Duterte out of office. So, oust Duterte. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhonda from Bayan USA. It's important, after all these speakers today, that we are agitated, that we mobilize into action, and plenty of the speakers have already shared many calls to action, many remedies that are pro-people, pro-health amidst this crisis of this global pandemic of COVID-19. So please continue to post your thoughts and reflections using our hashtags Duterte virus, Duterte resign. So this next portion, we're going to open it up to all of you, our audience. So the floor is open. We're doing a Q&A session plus an open mic. So if you either have a question or you would like to offer some additional insight today, please speak up. So we have a speaker already who requested some time to speak, and their name is Mark Harrison. So Mark Harrison, we're going to unmute you if you're still here. And you have, for everybody who has a Q&A or open mic, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, thanks for the call. It's been very, very informative. I just want to raise just some quick concerns. One, the U.S. is going to provide $4 million to the Philippines for the COVID virus. It would be good if we intervene in the process now to say how that money should be spent. There is a USAID task force that we could talk to about not giving it directly to Duarte, but to other groups, organizations which people have talked about in this discussion tonight. So that's one strong thing that I suggest. I am concerned how we talk about that Duarte should go. All right. In the context of the United States, I would say it is up to the people of the Philippines to make that decision, not the U.S. government. Because as you know, the U.S. government wants to overthrow the governments of Venezuela and Iran. So I just think we need to be clear on that statement. And lastly, I think we need to be discussing, that's which I said before, the chair of the Asia and Pacific Islanders Caucus. She's in California. Her name is escaping me. She needs to be playing a much stronger role on this because she is speaking out against the racism that is taking place towards Asian Americans, defining them as, quote, you brought us this disease. So anyway, that's my comments.
Thank you so much, Mark Harrison. For folks who don't know, Mark Harrison is with the United Methodist Church, General Board of Church and Society based in DC. Thank you so much for your comment. Are there any other questions, or do any of our speakers, would they like to respond to the US aid? Okay, maybe Reverend Sadie, I see you raising your hand. Let's see, let's get Reverend Sadie unmuted.
Got it. Okay. So yes, as Mark said, the U.S. is going to give $4 million to the Philippines under U.S. aid. This is different than the money that they have given through military. Where this gets very sketchy is part of this money can be used for surveillance for rapid response to infectious diseases. So we know that odds are very good that part of this $4 million are going to be used for military operations under the guise of how Duterte is handling his response. So one of the things that iChirp is continuing to push for is that we want to demand transparency for where these funds are going and how they're being used. Because if the US is going to send aid, which, in this case, because it's a pandemic and there is a need, we're not opposed to it, but the wording of this particular case is very troubling because it does have that caveat in there that it can be used for surveillance. And so we know that in that area that there's a loophole for them to continue to use it for military operations. So in agreement with Mark that we do need to push, one of our pushes need to be to continue to ask for transparency and also where the funds are going to be used and who's going to receive the funds and how.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sadie. We do have one question. So Alpheus of Anakbayan Rutgers in New Jersey said, with the info circling that the PH government is monitoring social media and private messages more so in this time, how should we proceed with our organizing in a secure way in light of this? Do any of our speakers want to take this question? Maybe either Rhonda or Yves, or even Attorney Edre Alalia.
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a very legitimate concern. And I guess on our end, we can continue to, create as much safety precautions, know our rights. At the end of the day, the best defense of the Filipino people and us here to assert our rights. These are constitutionally protected rights to speak up and criticize the Philippine government. So I think even more so, even more important for us to speak up because of this measures by the Philippine government. And just to respond on the point about calling for the Duterte government to step down, we recognize the point about we're not calling for the United States to step in and intervene. We uphold Philippine sovereignty against all foreign powers. What we from Malaya Movement support is the move of the Filipino people to get rid of an oppressive regime in the Philippines. So as Filipinos overseas, we support this call. And just to point out, in the past 12 hours, the calls of hashtag Oust Duterte Now has been trending in response to Duterte's orders or statement to shoot them down, right? Everyone who's gonna violate the quarantine. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Yves. We actually have somebody who has their hand raised to speak, and then Edre, I know you also raised your hand to speak, but we have a question coming up for you. So David Borden, if you would like to speak, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. I actually have a question or some interrelated questions, if that's okay. And I represent the organization StopTheDrugWar.org and have focused the last 2 years on Philippine human rights solidarity. Early during Duterte's drug war, we saw reports and pictures of incredible overcrowding in jails and or prisons in the Philippines due to people turning themselves in because they were on drug war kill lists or were afraid they would be. Uh, has that situation continued? With with respect to the current situation, is there any discussion of the implications of the COVID-19 virus for the jail and the jails and prisons? This has become a highly salient issue in the U.S. at this time. Is there information on whether or how the drug war and EJKs are continuing at this time? And lastly, this is something no one really knows yet, but does anyone have an analysis or speculation as to when other issues besides the pandemic may become politically salient again in the Philippines, when there will be space to talk about the drug war and extrajudicial killings, the attacks on media, all the other important issues that many people joining this call work on?
Thank you so much for your questions, David. And maybe we could direct this at Edre. So kind of to summarize the questions. So as we know, amidst the COVID crisis, the very sensitive populations that are within jail and prisons are impacted by COVID-19. So in the Philippines, what are the impacts on the prison population? Also, second question, what are updates on the drug war and extrajudicial killings? Are these continuing amidst the COVID-19 crisis? And at what point can we discuss or continue the movement for political issues outside of COVID, like the drug war, extrajudicial killings? So maybe Edre, if you would like to take this question. And bear with us as we're unmuting people. There are about 200 people on this call.
Hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Well, before I answer the two questions, I'd just like to weigh in first on the question before that, which is what do we do in the face of all this intense surveillance and restriction on freedom of speech in different platforms. Even as we speak now, I'd like to share with you that we got information that the National Bureau of Investigation, the NBI, which is the counterpart of your FBI, has been sending notices to people, summoning them to explain certain posts that they made on their Facebook pages and other social applications. No, but I think history has proven that the only way by which we can defeat this kind of repression and restriction on our very fundamental rights is to fight back. Never blink. Keep the anger. Because when we blink, when we look the other way, when we mute ourselves, that's when they win. There will be cost, of course. There will be cost. But it's a small price to pay. Eventually, we will win. They may silence us. They may throw all charges against us. But in the end, we will win. So keep on pounding the table. Keep on knocking on doors. Keep on spreading the real narrative. And of course, the details you don't have to speak. We don't have to talk about this by Zoom. No? But with respect to David's questions, unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has had the headlines. It's probably most of the time the content of the news of the multimedia. And for good reason, of course, no. But anecdotally, we get information that there is no let up in the extrajudicial killings. Perhaps it has not been reported in the same way as it should be, but our information is that there's no let up. To what degree, we don't know yet. We will have to establish that empirically. With respect to, as a matter of fact, if I may just add, David, even the arrests, even the extrajudicial killings of political activists, it's all over the news, has not stopped. So it's just a question of what is the degree of the attacks despite or in the face of this COVID pandemic. And then I also mentioned earlier with respect to the detention, we are pushing for the immediate, unconditional, but systematic, of course, release of prisoners, especially the sick and elderly, including the political prisoners. As a matter of fact, if you heard about it, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Bachelet, publicly spoke about this issue and asking governments to release detention prisoners in the same way that other countries, if I'm not mistaken, is it Iraq or Iran and some other country have released thousands of detention prisoners because of the danger of this contagion. And concretely, David, I'd like to inform you, it's not secret because it's in our image, so the state has access to it. We are in the course of preparing a petition before the proper court, whether it's the trial court or the Supreme Court, precisely asking for the release of these detention prisoners primarily on humanitarian grounds. So we will be filing that any day soon as a concrete response to this situation. I hope I was able to answer your concern, David.
Yes, thank you so much, Attorney Edre. We do have another question that we're going to ask from Dan Tagala. The question is, have we reached a critical mass or boiling point in the Philippines enough to totally resist and oust Duterte? What would it take to make that happen? What should happen in the next few weeks or months? So to our speakers, maybe our speakers from the Philippines, if they want to chime in on this question. Let's see. If we could unmute Attorney Edre. Oh, hold on one second, Edre. I think you're still on mute. Okay, can you speak? Oh.
But I can yield if somebody wants to take the first crack. Ginny, you want to take the first crack?
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Edre. No,
Okay.
go ahead, Edre.
We don't have the crystal ball, of course, no. And there is no set menu by which you can say that a confluence of events, subjective and objective conditions is sufficient to make accountable. I'll be very, very kind. No? Make accountable a government that is not responsive because it is a legitimate and legal right of people when its own government does not serve its interests. And that is recognized even under international law. But this is something that I will have to be very, very clear about. Certainly, it is simmering. The signs are there, the writings are on the wall, but is it enough? Only time will tell. But it is simmering. The discontent, the disgust, over a broad sector of society, not only the progressive sectors, the middle class, the poor, even the intellectuals, those people who believe before in Duterte are now even celebrities, no, movie celebrities. They're very careful, very conservative for good reason, but they're speaking out. You can check it out in social media that people are speaking out and things are simmering.
Thank you,
Yeah.
attorney. Dr. Jean?
Yeah. I'd like to share with you last night during the outrage, a couple of my students who are currently doctors, and doctors, I have to tell you, are very conservative people. Um, they were asking me what can be done. How can they join? This is the time to really push for the change of government. And I said, the outrage is palpable, but can it be sustained? That's one. Because we've seen, I mean, I've been around since EDSA 1 and EDSA 2, and I've seen that outrage needs to be transformed into action, and not just action that is not directed, but it has to be an organized set of action. And there are things that we need to watch out for as we develop a mass movement. As you said, it's not just a collective outrage, it has to be a collective movement that would do it, and that has to be sustained over time. I agree with Attorney Edre, that the seeds are there. In fact, it's not more. It's more than just the seeds. Um, the the current that the current of disgust and disillusionment is there. What we can do, though, is both here and abroad, is to continue with the counter narrative, continue exposing the flaws that or the lies that are being peddled by government, to clarify issues and make people more aware that they should just be they shouldn't just feel helpless. There is that part also, and from my conversations last night with other people, there's a sense of helplessness that, in the middle of pandemic, we can't even gather together and maybe conduct a rally or do a mobilization. But then we can do a lot of things outside while we are in a pandemic. At the end of the day, when we do reach the threshold, we have to ask the question, are we ready to risk being exposed to a pandemic as opposed to just dying under the hands of a dictator? And that's something we have to deal with. And I think when people are ready to answer that question, ready to stick their necks out and ready to commit, and that I think would be the threshold that we're looking for. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jean. We have one more response to that question. We're going to call on Aves from Malaya Movement.
Yeah, so I agree with Attorney Edre and Dr. Jean. The signs are there, and despite the dangers, whether from the virus or from Duterte's repression, people are speaking out. No, and I think on our end here in the United States, right? I couldn't agree more. It's very important for us to get organized. We can, tweet all we want. But again, like what Dr. Jean said, this must be translated into organized and coordinated action. No, and I think even this call is a testament to people's rising anger against the regime. No, and also the number of young people in this call is also very important to take note, right? So with Julie announcing the calls to action later. There are clear actions that we can take, but the essence is that we must get organized. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aves. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today for the Q&A and open mic. There are a lot of amazing questions in the chat thread. Please will respond to all of your questions. So if you email malayamovement@gmail.com, we can get those questions answered. Also, if you're interested, there's a lot of questions that came up around transparency on US aid to the Philippines. So please we'll connect you with the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines if you're interested in getting involved in those campaigns. Malaya Movement is also a partner in legislative advocacy campaigns. So if we could go to the next slide. We're going to do some calls to action. So if you are angered by what's happening in the Philippines, like our speaker said, we cannot be silent, we cannot be mute, we cannot just accept our conditions. So we really have to organize, build our unity together in fighting for the Philippines at this time of the COVID crisis. So next slide, we have a couple calls to action for you. So today is the first day we're launching a petition which is called Kalusugan, Hindi Diktadura. We're calling to stop Duterte's use of the COVID-19 crisis to abuse his executive powers. And we're saying no to emergency powers to Duterte. This is being addressed to Congress. So this petition will be delivered to Congress, and our demands specifically, because you heard the situation or what's happening, our demands are to repeal the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, no emergency powers to the Duterte government, for the immediate reallocation of funding for healthcare services and equipment for all healthcare facilities in the Philippines, including free mass testing for all parts of the country. We want to end the militarization of Manila and Luzon and other militarized areas in the Visayas and Mindanao, ensure health, safety, and economic livelihood for workers, including our overseas Filipino workers and the poor affected by the crisis. Stop the ongoing repression and extrajudicial killings of the rural and urban poor, human rights defenders, and critics of Duterte. So please share this widely. If you want to sign the petition, it's bit.ly/Malaya COVID petition. Please sign today, share it widely. Next slide, please. So we are launching in conjunction with Malaya Movement, Buy in USA, and the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, Days of Action. Today is day one of a 3-part day of action. Starting tomorrow, we're gonna have a social media rally. So what you learned today, the stories that you're hearing, please go on the internet and spread the word about what's happening, and use our hashtags, Duterte virus and Duterte resign. And today, the trending hashtag really was Oust Duterte Now, so people can also participate and incorporate that. But please make your voices heard so we can expose the real conditions happening in the Philippines. Next slide, please. And this is a sample slide of what you can use. So everybody who's a participant on this call, there are some great graphics. And we know that the real virus here is the Duterte regime. It's Duterte himself. It's not just the COVID crisis, but it really is the inadequacy, the mismanagement, the militarist approach to the solution, which is the virus. So please, we encourage you to write your own statements, your own testimonies as well. Next slide. And so our day 3, day of action, is a phone-in action. So we are asking everybody to phone in and call the Philippine Embassy here in the United States and raise our concerns about Duterte's response to COVID-19. We have a script that we have already created for you so that it's simple, it's easy. It's calling one of the complaint lines at the embassies. So if you share the next slide, we can also email out these calls to action. Next slide, please. And here, it's a very simple script, and it's essentially sharing the demands that we've laid out in our petition. And if you are in different parts of the country, whether you're on the East Coast, it starts at 9 a.m. If you're on the West Coast, 11 a.m., Midwest, 10 a.m., or if you're in Hawaii, 10 a.m. And the phone number is there for you to call. Next slide. Yes, and like Yves mentioned, the importance of organizing. It really is on the people to express their needs, their vision, and if we are to get Duterte to resign, or if we have learned from the people power movements of the past that people can topple dictators if we organize ourselves. So please, if you're interested, join the Malaya Movement, email us. We have an upcoming national new member orientation that will be online. This is April 7th, so please tune in. We will send all of this out, fill out our interest form. So it's bit.ly/joinmalaya2020. And I think this is the final slide. Or we have 2 more slides to go. So next slide, please. And if you don't know, we're building chapters all across the United States. So if you're in NorCal or Northern California, here in the Northeast, in New York, New Jersey, Texas, the Pacific Northwest, Southern California, the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia area, out in the Midwest, we have regional coordinators, we have chapters that we're building that you can plug into already. So please join our orientation and we can connect you with your local nearest chapter. And next slide, please. Amazing. Thank you all so much for sticking around with us for the last 2 hours for this very important online forum, learning more about what's happening and the mismanagement of the Duterte regime and the COVID crisis. Take what you learned today, share it, continue organizing with us. Please, we need as many people as possible to join our movement. And thank you to the organizations that participated today. It's the morning in the Philippines, so thank you, Doc Jean from the Community Medicine Development Foundation, Attorney Edre from the National Union of People's Lawyers, Migrante USA, US Pinoys for Good Governance, Bayan USA, and the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. So thank you once again. We'll send you all our calls to action, and we'll continue to do this work beyond this webinar. So thank you again so much. Have a good night. Bye, everyone.